Waterloop.
Welcome to Waterloop, the podcast that explores solutions for sustainability and equity in water. I'm the host, Travis Loop. This episode is part of a series, Mississippi by Nature, that looks at the use of nature-based solutions to help the river and its communities. The series is supported by the Walton Family Foundation and outfitted by Patagonia. Excess nutrients from farms in Iowa and across the Midwest are a major challenge, polluting local waterways and ultimately impacting the Mississippi River and Gulf of Mexico. To address this, the Soil and Water Outcomes Fund incentivizes farmers to adopt practices that improve water quality and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Adam Kiel, Managing Director of the Soil and Water Outcomes Fund, explains how farmers implement both in-field practices like cover crops and no-till, and edge-of-field solutions such as saturated buffers and bioreactors. Through outcome-based payments, the fund encourages sustainable agriculture, rewarding farmers for measurable environmental benefits. The initiative has rapidly scaled, expanding from a pilot project in Iowa to now enrolling farms across 25 states and targeting 1 million acres in 2024. Very excited to be out here on a farm in Iowa where there have some measures in place to address water quality issues and everything. Talk to me about the types of practices that farms can have in place to reduce water pollution, improve the health of waterways, and ultimately the Mississippi.
Yeah, so we're here on a farm where they've got a good balance of practices that you can do in the field. So we're looking at different crop rotations, more than one crop or two crop growing in that field over the course of a couple years. We've also got things that we can't actually see today, but will be here in the fall, like cover crops and no-till. But then we've also got practices that are more structural in place that are kind of off the areas where the crops are grown, like saturated buffers, bioreactors, buffer strips, which we're standing in right here now, and prairie strips. So you kind of think about what can be done on a farm, you think about what practices can happen where the crops are growing, and then practices where the crops aren't growing, where we can treat water and store water. So those are kind of the different categories of practices that farmers can do.
All right, let's talk about each of those a little bit. Let's start in the field. Cover crops, something I've heard about for a long time. How does that work?
Yeah, so if you think about our Midwest cropping system, you've got primarily corn and soybeans that are grown here. And those crops might be growing for 6 or 7 months out of the year. But you've got other times of the year when those crops aren't growing, when the soil is sensitive to loss, both runoff loss with sediments, but also nutrient loss. So what cover crops do is protect that soil and help those nutrients from being lost. They store them in the field during those sensitive times of the year. So, whether it's October, November, with our kind of warmer winters, maybe even into December, and then especially in the spring when we get spring rains and runoff and waters shedding off the fields when there's not a primary crop growing. Cover crops help protect that field during those shoulder seasons or during the sensitive times of the year.
Another infield is the no-till approach.
Yeah, so no-till is what it sounds like. You're not going into a field and tilling it like you would. Historically, tillage has been a popular practice that farmers do to prepare the fields for planting. We're trying to help farmers switch to reduced tillage systems or no-till systems where you're not doing as much field work to prepare that seed bed, but you're kind of leaving it and planting directly into the prior crop residue that might be there from a prior corn crop or soybean crop or other crop that's there.
Was there anything else in field? Any other practices?
Yeah, there's things that farmers can do with their nutrient management, right? So fertilizer applications, manure applications, those are all things that have nutrients that crops use to grow, but they're also the source of potentially nutrients that are lost to water. So helping farmers understand where there's opportunities to improve that management in terms of the fertilizer program are things that we're helping farmers do and produce outcomes that include both water quality benefits and other environmental benefits like climate benefits.
So we move to the edge of the field or off field.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the practices there. It's awesome. We're standing in one right
yeah, we're,
now.
we're standing in one.
Fun
right
place
now,
to have this interview. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're standing in a stream buffer. So this protects the stream that we're standing next to from runoff from adjacent fields and upslope areas that we're looking at. So that's kind of a practice that just provides some grassland or forest buffer between fields and streams. Also within this, you can get things that treat water. So you can get things like bioreactors, which take tile drainage water off of fields and treat it for nitrogen. So you have a lower level of nitrate and nitrogen entering the stream.
How does it do that?
Yeah, so it filters water from tile drainage through a chamber of wood chips, and that activity of the microbes on the wood chips consumes the nitrogen, and out the other end you get a lower nitrate level water. Kind of similar to that, but a different process is saturated buffers. So using the natural organic matter of the soil and the stream buffer to treat for nitrogen, have those here. Those are kind of practices that are underground that you don't really see when you're just looking at a nice grass buffer like this, but they're there. And then you can go to things like ponds and wetlands that are more structural and larger in nature that are going to treat higher volumes of water and provide other benefits than just nitrate loss.
So all of these practices are great for water quality and people that are trying to improve the health of local waterways and, places like the Mississippi River, ultimately the Gulf of Mexico, want these types of conservation measures in place. Farmers are running a business, right? They have X amount of land. They want to grow as much as they can of value on that. But you're asking them to take some of that out of production, if you will, right? And you have to incentivize them. Could you talk about how that works, that pressure on a farmer and how it's offset financially?
Yeah, so let's just look at the financial conditions this year and kind of talk about, this part of Iowa. So as we kind of look at the landscape around us, we're looking at a high value land asset. Probably in this area where we're looking at today, $15,000 to $20,000 an acre. Those land prices have increased over time, and therefore farmers are under increasing pressure, and landowners to, provide a revenue stream to pay for that land. And the economics with some of these practices don't always work out. There's not a financial return for some of the things that we talked about that farmers can do to improve water quality. So how have we as Americans and citizens of Iowa chosen to support these practices? It's been mostly through financial assistance that's provided by USDA or EPA or state departments of ag or other sources as a cost share program or an incentive program to get farmers to do these practices. Those dollars only go so far. So we're always looking for creative and new ways to incentivize ways that farmers can implement these practices and still kind of meet the financial needs that they have at the farm.
You say they only go so far. That's because the pool of money is only so large, whereas the demand or opportunity is greater than that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. So if we look at the Farm Bill and the conservation Title II of the Farm Bill, the biggest conservation program in the country by far, billions of dollars, and that program touches around 10% of U.S. cropland acres. So, we need to think of other ways to support farmers in the adoption of these practices that are going to improve water quality, improve climate, improve the ecosystem as a whole. And those cost share and incentive programs only go so far.
Is there an appetite, a willingness from more farmers to do this type of practice if the financial levers were there?
I believe so.
Yeah.
And I think USDA also has the data to show that there's a waiting list for cost share programs that they have. We've seen the Inflation Reduction Act funnel more funding to conservation programs. So over the next couple of years, we'll see if that demand is there, but every indication that I've got is the demand is there, and that's true for farmers that participate in our program as well.
Could you list just some of those programs, some of the main actual programs that are used?
Yeah, in Iowa or
Iowa or
generally?
the Mississippi River Basin, sure.
Yeah, so probably the big ones on the regional scale are going to be the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, which is through USDA, Natural Resource Conservation Service. That one's used quite a bit. That's probably the one that gets the most conservation on the ground in the upper Mississippi. And then you have other programs through other agencies like EPA, like the 319 program, which is part of the Clean Water Act programs. So that provides some funding, although it's pretty minimal in the grand scheme of things when you compare to all the conservation funding. Then depending on the state, you get different state programs. So Iowa has the Water Quality Initiative program. That supports a lot of farmers in Iowa. I think last year their cover crop program supported around 3,000 farmers in Iowa. So great numbers there. And then depending on other states, you might have programs going on, and some states might have more or less funding. But those are probably some of the biggest ones that are used in the state are EQIP and the Water Quality Initiative.
Okay, yeah, thanks. So let's talk about the Soil and Water Outcomes Fund. Tell me about the genesis of this and how it's come in to try to fill this void.
Yeah, so our hypothesis when we started the Soil and Water Outcomes Fund back in 2019 was that we wanted to create an opportunity for farmers that looked more like a market and signal to farmers that there's a demand for water quality outcomes that they produce as well as greenhouse gas benefits that they produce. So if you think about farmers, they're used to responding to markets and prices for crops like corn and soybeans. Our thought was, let's create signals for farmers to produce environmental outcomes and see if they reacted. So that was our thought back in 2019. Like, is this going to work or not? Anyway, we put some signals out there to farmers that said, hey, here's demand. And we had buyers for those outcomes lined up already. And we deployed a pilot project in Iowa, 9,500 acres, so pretty minimal, just to see if it would work and farmers would participate. Well, pretty quickly we learned that farmers react to markets, and they responded by signing up. And we had to pretty quickly shut down enrollment because it exceeded our demand for that particular year. So we ended that year with 9,500 acres, really great farmer participants who were doing new things on their farms to produce these environmental outcomes. And we gave farmers the choice. So we said, here's the signal. You do what you want on your farm to produce the outcomes, and we'll structure a financial payment that aligns with the volume of outcomes you produce. There was a pretty robust data collection process to understand the outcomes that are produced, but at the end of the day, we had payment ranges that were in the single digits up to $40, $50 an acre, and it was all outcome calibrated. So if someone produced a low volume of water quality outcomes, their payment was low, and the conversely was true as well. So really trying to produce an environmental market that reacts and sends signals much like a commodity market in Iowa. So that was us in 2019, and since then we've scaled every year, grown our demand in terms of our partners who want those outcomes have grown in terms of our corporate partners and public sector partners. And we've grown to this year, we're targeting probably close to 1 million acres of enrollment this year in 2024.
Wow. Let's build on that success. Could you talk a million acres? Where is this all happening now? Because you've gone beyond Iowa.
Yeah, so we've taken Iowa and used that as our core and where we have the most acres enrolled, but we've grown into neighboring states and then across the Midwest, and now we're in 25 plus states, mostly Midwest, Northeast, and Southeast U.S., but that's kind of our footprint now. Really depends on where our partners have demand for outcomes is where we go. So if we have a corporate partner come to us and say, hey, we want environmental outcomes tied to corn production in Indiana, we'll go and enroll corn farmers in Indiana. So it's really, we need signals from the demand side of our program to tell us where we need to go, what the signals are for farmers, and how many acres and outcomes need to be produced.
1 million acres in 25 states. Do you have any estimate of the potential that you could go to? You're at 1 million, you're like, we see 10 million acres out there, we could do this. Any math like that?
I've been amazed with the growth that we've seen since 2019. I think for us, I wouldn't shy away from saying, 5 million acres would be possible in a couple of years.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, incredible. How do you validate that these practices are actually getting the outcomes? That's something that's out there. There's always kind of some skepticism when it comes to kind of market-based outcomes, trading programs, et cetera.
Yeah, so the first thing that we rely on is significant data from farmers. So when we enroll a farmer, they need to provide baseline data about each field and then what they're going to do. And that includes, one way to look at it is anytime a farmer does anything in a field, we need to know what that is and details about it. So if they're doing a tillage operation, we need to know when it occurred, what they're doing, how deep they were tilling, and think about that level of detail for every time you enter a field. So planting, fertilizing, harvesting, planting cover crops, that high level of detail is needed. What that detail does, it provides us information that goes into environmental models. So running USDA supported models to generate estimates of those outcomes. So that's number one. Number two is doing field visits to every single field that's enrolled in the program every year. So we have a verification team that goes to every field, takes photos of what they see in the field during the time of year when it's critical to be there. So spring for cover crops and no-till. We're there documenting what happens so we can say, here's the farmer's data, here's what they said they were going to do, here's documentation that they did it. We also do soil sampling and water sampling as well. So we're going to a percentage of the fields that are enrolled in the program and collecting water samples every 2 weeks during the growing season. We're going to 10% of all enrolled fields every year and collecting soil samples. Those data sets are going to help us over time verify that the outcomes that we're producing align with what the models are saying and that farmers are doing those practices. So we've got a pretty high standard in terms of, one, data collection, two, ensuring that farmers are following through with what they said they're going to do, and three, that we're going above and beyond the models with actual primary data collected from the enrolled fields to compare against what the model estimates say.
Yeah. It must be working from a financial perspective from the farmer for them to have X amount of land out of production, do this practice there, or if it's an infield, you know what I'm saying. Yep. So they must be getting, paid at a rate that is equivalent or works enough compared to what if they'd be doing typical farming, right?
Yeah, so a couple things for us. Payment is a big part of it, but also service and time are a big part of it as well. So farmers have limited amount of time. And oftentimes what we hear are stories about farmers enrolling in programs that might take weeks, months to go through the process of submitting an application, maybe finding out that they got approved, going through the whole contracting process might take, 6 months. Well, that's time that has a value. So one thing that we try to do is have a very speedy and supported process so farmers can submit their application to us, find out if they were approved, get a payment estimate, and get under contract and get some financial support within a couple weeks. So we're trying to streamline the time. When we look at the financial side of it, we do two things. One is it's an outcome-based payment, so farmers can decide if it's worth it for them, and they can always turn down the offer. We don't have many farmers turn down the offer, but that is an option. The other thing that we do is we do 2 yearly payment installments. So we talked earlier about the conservation programs that are funded through government today. Those are reimbursement programs. So farmers have to carry that expense for months before they're reimbursed. We provide half of a farmer's payment soon after they sign their contract with us. That helps them buy cover crop seeds or get equipment that they might need, or at least not have to carry that cost on their balance sheet for months.
Sure.
So that's a little bit of financial innovation that we've brought to conservation, is providing some upfront payment to help farmers get through that, those initial expenses that they might have tied to their contract that they have with us.
Do you have any kind of rolled up numbers, if you will, as to okay, by doing this in Iowa, we have realized these types of benefits or nutrient reductions?
2023, we were on around 300,000 acres. So even, talk about growth from year to year.
Holy cow,
This
it
last year
tripled.
to this year is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But if we look at last year, our average farmer payment was $33 an acre. On all of those acres, our average nutrient savings, so the nitrogen savings, was around 8 to 10 pounds per acre. That fluctuates by year. So if you think about that, that was our 2023 number. Our phosphorus losses that we're preventing are around 3/4 of a pound per acre. And then if you look at our greenhouse gases, we're looking at around 0.8 metric tons per acre of reductions and removals. So emission reductions as well as sequestration. So achieving really good water quality and climate benefits from all those acres.
Yeah, incredible.
Yeah.
Why is it important to be getting water quality and climate benefits at the same time as often as you can with this?
Yeah, so for us, it's, we talked about the partners and providing that demand signal. What we observe today with our partners is they're kind of singular focused either on climate related outcomes from agriculture or water. And in order for us to make a financial case to the farmer, we need both of those. So oftentimes we're putting partnerships together where you've got one partner that supports the water quality. That could be a municipality, it could be a federal government, could be a corporation. And you've got another party that supports the climate benefits and the outcomes related to climate. And we're putting those parties together in order to compile the amount of financial assistance and support for the program and the farmer payments to operate. So it kind of takes both those parties working together on the environmental outcomes in order to make it work.
Yeah. Could you share maybe who some of these interested parties are on the water quality side in having, kind of these markets?
Yeah, on the water quality side, we see municipalities. We see some corporations interested in their water quality outcomes and footprint in the areas where we work. Cargill is one of those companies that have been partnered with us for a while and have an interest in the greenhouse gases and the water quality outcomes. But municipalities, state governments, we've worked with state governments in the past around water quality outcomes, as well as the federal government through NRCS as well.
And that municipality, I mean, that's really in one case where utilities are getting water that's high in nutrients and they're having to spend to treat that, right? And if they can get lower nutrient water coming in, then that helps them from a financial perspective.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It only makes sense for anyone to work with us if we're a lower cost alternative than something they could do on site. So we want to make sure that through our pricing of, say, a pound of nitrogen reduction, that we're being cost effective for that partner of ours in what they're doing with us. So we don't want to have a pricing structure that is way out of line where it doesn't make sense for them to work with us. They could just treat the water or go some other avenue. So we really wanted to make financial sense for them in working with us through the pricing structure that we have.
Backing way out again to the big picture, it's cool that all these practices you're talking about is really just using nature itself as a solution.
Yep.
You're not talking about big infrastructure, big engineering. It's just like let nature come in here and do the work, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of intentional for us. When we did a financial analysis of those big structural practices that you talk about, yes, they're great. They do a lot of good things for the environment, for water quality. But in an outcome-based program, when we're trying to provide a cost-effective price per pound, the numbers just didn't pencil out, either because the time horizon to achieve that benefit was so long that it just didn't make sense, or the upfront cost to construct that thing was so much that it drove our water quality pricing too high to make sense for our partner customers.
Waterloop.
Next, I visited Nick Hermanson on his farm in Story, Iowa, to hear how the Soil and Water Outcomes Fund helps him implement conservation practices.
Waterloop.
Thank you for having me out here to your farm.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Tell me about your property, what you're growing here.
Yep, so my name's Nick Hermanson. I'm from Story City, Iowa. I'm a fifth generation farmer. We raise corn and soybeans. We're standing here in a soybean field. Generally, we raise about 2/3 of our acres in corn and a third in soybeans. So we'll plant two corn crops in a row and then a crop of soybeans and then go back to 2 corn crops in a row. We raise turkeys on our farm, and so we can use a lot of the corn to feed. We'll send it to a feed mill, grind it up, and bring it back and feed the turkeys. The soybeans are all grown as a seed soybean. We sell them back to a seed company to produce next year's seed as needed, and some of them go into the feed industry too if they don't need them all for seed.
So as a farmer, this is about your livelihood,
Yeah.
right? You have X amount of land.
Yep.
You've got to grow your cash crops to make things work for you.
Yeah.
When it comes to putting in conservation practices, that has to work financially too. Could you
Absolutely.
talk about that?
Well, the conservation practices have to be sustainable, and not just from like a sustainability aspect that everybody likes to talk to, but from a financial sustainability aspect. Because if I'm going to put an extra $20 to $30 to $40 an acre out every year, well, there's years that grain prices are high, and that's not a problem. As we're seeing this summer, grain prices are dropping. We're not sure what the next few years are going to be, and so if it's not a sustainable, economical model, that's the first thing that's going to be cut. There's no doubt about it. And so that's why the Soil and Waters Outcome Fund has helped us. One, it covers variable expenses on buying our seed or some chemicals and stuff we need, but then we're also able to use some of that money to invest in equipment that allows us to do this more efficiently with less labor. It means it's easier to get it done. And so we can use that to make it more economical in the long term.
How long have you been part of that program?
Since its inception, I would
About 5 years, 4 or 5 years
yeah,
then.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, it's market based, and they pay you to put in which practices?
Basically the strip till
Okay.
on some acres, and then the cover crops.
Okay.
And some nitrogen management.
Yeah.
They're kind of the 3 big things.
And would you have a challenge getting that funding from NRCS or from other sources?
I would say the Outcomes Fund makes it significantly easier.
How so?
Because it's kind of a one-stop shop. You give them your information, and they'll give you, a balance of, well, this is what we'll pay for this, and they have excellent staff that really does a lot of the legwork for you. When we started, it's been interesting to watch it all evolve. Where the first year, they had kind of some paper printed forms, and I'm like, no, I'm putting this on a spreadsheet because it's going to take me 7 hours to fill this out. And now it's all on a web-based thing, and they also have staff members that will, sit down with the growers and go through everything and just make sure that they don't have any questions or even fill it out for them. So yeah, there are various sources of funding that could probably be complementary. I don't have a clue on values, but the Outcomes Fund is definitely a one-stop shop where you give them the information, they give you what it's worth in the marketplace, and you move on.
Yeah, and I understand that it has grown significantly. They've got like 1 million acres now participating, 25 states. That's got to be a lot of 25 states. That's got to be a lot of farmers. So that probably speaks to that ease.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that financial piece.
Yeah, when it was first started, I think it was about 3 watersheds within the state of Iowa. And it wasn't even the entire state; it was just a few select watersheds. And that's when Adam reached out to me, knew I was in one of them, and we sat down and worked it out. And so, I would say that definitely adds to that.
And what's the mentality among your fellow farmers out here about conservation practices and the financial piece and the ease of doing it all?
It is changing. There's in every business, there's all types of attitudes and mindsets. There's people that are just going to continue to do what they do until they're retired or move on. There's younger people that are like, no, we can do better. For me, it's honestly somewhat about the challenge or the. It's always fun to do something new, and I would just get bored if I was doing the exact same thing that my grandfather did every year in, year out. So, so we're seeing lots of different changes in the farming attitudes towards conservation. There was probably a time where it was well, if they make us do that, we'll do that. That is definitely, there's still those people out there, but they're a minority compared to what they were probably 15 years ago, 10 years ago.
And programs like Soil and Water Outcomes Fund are helping, enabling.
Yeah, because they also will, if they have growers that are like, well, I think I should maybe do that, but I don't know how. Well, you can go to them and they'll partner you up with either people that'll do the custom application for a year or two until you figure it out, or at least they have on-staff agronomists that can answer those questions of what do I do.
I guess lastly, you're near the Skunk River, or
Yes,
right up against
it's about
it?
a mile that way.
Yeah, could you talk just about that fact, explain how close it is and how your farm impacts that? And
well, I mean, all of the farmland in the Midwest drains to some sort of watershed somewhere. And so, we're a ways away from the Mississippi Delta, but the water that does land here will eventually end up there. And so, we're all kind of in it. And so that's one thing that I do like about the Water Outcomes Fund is the interaction between the public, municipality, and the agriculture community, that it's not, two sides pointing fingers. It's, at the end of the day, we got to figure out how to do it together.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're in the water loop.